Chapter 16. As Stanley entered the rec room, he could hear X-Ray's voice from all the way across the room. "See what I'm saying?" X-Ray said. "Am I right or am I right?" The other bodies in the room were little more than bags of flesh and bones, dumped across broken chairs and couches. X-Ray was full of life, laughing and waving his arms around as he talked. "Yo, caveman, my man," he called out. Stanley made his way across the room. He slid over to Squid, said X-Ray. "Hey, slide over, Squid," said X-Ray. "Make room for the caveman." Stanley crashed on the couch. He looked for hidden cameras in the shower. He hadn't seen anything, and he hoped that Warden hadn't either. "What's the matter?" asked X-Ray. "You guys tired of something?" He laughed. "Hey, keep it down, will you?" groaned Zigzag. "I'm trying to watch TV." Stanley glanced up uncertainly at Zigzag, who was staring very intently at a busted television screen. The warden greeted the boys at breakfast and the next morning and went with them to their holes. Four holes, four dug in the holes, and three tended the wheelbarrows. "Glad you were here, X-Ray," she said to him. "We need your sharp eyes." Stanley spent more time pushing the wheelbarrow than digging because he was a much slower digger. He carted away the excess dirt and dumped it into previously dug holes. He was careful not to dump any of it in the holes where the gold tube was actually found. He could see the tube in his mind. It seemed so familiar that he couldn't place it. He thought that it might have been the lid to a fancy gold pen. KB could have been the initials of a famous author. The only famous authors he could think of were Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare and Mark Twain. Besides, it didn't really look like the top of a pen. By lunchtime, the warden was beginning to lose her patience. She made them eat quick so they could get back to work. If you can't work any faster," she told Mr. Sir, "then they're going to have to climb down there and dig with them." After that, everyone worked faster, especially Mr. Sir when Mr. Sir was watching them. Stanley practically ran when he pushed his wheelbarrow. Mr. Sir reminded them they weren't Girl Scouts. They didn't quit digging until after every group had finished. Later, as Stanley sat sprawled across the unstuffed chair, he tried to think of a way to tell the warden where the tube was really found without getting himself or X-Ray into trouble. It didn't seem possible. He even thought about sneaking out at night and digging the hole by himself, but the last thing he wanted to do after digging all day was dig at night, too. Besides, the shovels were locked up at night, presumably so they couldn't be used as weapons. Mr. Pendanski entered the rec room. "Stanley," he called as he made his way to him. "My name's Caveman." "His name's Caveman," said X-Ray. "Stanley," said Mr. Pendanski. "My name's Caveman," said Stanley. "Well, I have a letter for someone named Stanley Yellens," said Mr. Pendanski. He turned over an envelope in his hands. It doesn't say Caveman anywhere." Thanks," Stanley said, taking it. It was from his mother. "Who's it from?" Squid asked. "Your mother?" Stanley put it in his big pocket of his pants. "You're going to read it to us?" asked Armpit. "Aren't you going to read it to us?" asked Armpit. "Give him some space," said X-Ray. "If Caveman doesn't want to read it to us, he doesn't have to read. He doesn't have to. It's probably from his girlfriend." Stanley smiled. He read it later. After the other boys had gone to dinner. "Dear Stanley, it was wonderful to hear from you. Your letter made me feel like one of the other moms who can afford to send their kids to summer camp. I know it's not the same, but I'm very proud of you for trying to make the best of a bad situation. Who knows? Maybe something good will come of this. Your father thinks he's real close to a breakthrough on his sneaker project. I hope so. The landlord is threatening to evict us because of the odor. I feel sorry for the little old lady who lives in a stew. It must have smelled awful. from both of us. What's so funny? Zero asked. It startled him. He thought Zero had gone to dinner with the others. Nothing. Just something my mom wrote. What'd she say? Zero asked. Nothing. Oh, sorry, said Zero. Well, my dad's trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers, so the apartment kind of smells bad because he's always cooking these old sneakers. So anyway, the letter, my mom said she felt sorry for the little old lady who lived in a shoe, because it must have smelt bad in there. Zero stared blankly at him. The nursery rhymes? Zero said nothing. You've heard of nursery rhyme of the little old lady who lives in a shoe? No. Stanley was amazed. How does it go? Asked Zero. Didn't you ever watch Sesame Street? Stanley asked. Zero stared blankly. Stanley looked headed on to dinner. He would have felt pretty silly reciting old nursery rhymes at Camp Green Lake. Chapter 17. For the next week and a half, the boys continued to dig in the area where X-Ray had supposedly found the gold tube. Then they widened X-Ray's hole, and as well as the holes Armpit and Squid had been digging in. Until the fourth day, all three holes met to form one big hole. As the day wore on, the warden became less and less patient. She arrived later in the morning and left earlier in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the boys continued to dig later and later. This is no bigger than when it left yesterday, she said after arriving late one morning. Well, after sunrise. What have you been doing down there? Nothing, said Squid. It was the wrong thing to say. At just that moment, Armpit was returning from a bathroom break. How nice of you to join us, she said. And what have we been doing? I had, go. The warden jabbed at Armpit with her pitchfork, knocking him backwards into the big hole. The pitchfork left 3 holes in front of his shirt, the tiny hole, and 3 tiny spots of blood. You're giving these boys too much water, the warden said to Mr. Pendanski. They continued to dig until late afternoon, long after all the groups had finished for the day. Stanley was down in the big hole with the other 6 boys. They had stopped using wheelbarrows. He dug his shovel into the side of the hole. He scooped up some dirt and was rising up from the surface when Zigzag shovel caught him on the side of the head. He collapsed. He wasn't sure if he passed out or not. He looked as if Zigzag's wild head staring down at him. I ain't digging that dirt up, Zigzag said. That's your dirt. Hey, Mom, Magnet called. Caveman's been hurt. Stanley brought his finger to the side of his neck. Feel the wet blood, a pretty big gash just below his ear. Magnet helped Stanley to his feet, then up and out of the hole. Mr. Sir had made a bandage out of a piece of sack, sunflower seeds, and taped over Stanley's wound. Then they told him to get back to work. It isn't nap time. When Stanley returned to the hole, Zigzag was waiting for him. That's your dirt, Zigzag said. You have to dig it up. It's covering my dirt. Stanley felt a little dizzy. He could see a small pile of dirt, and it took him a moment to realize the dirt which had been covering his shovel when he was hit. He scooped it up, then Zigzag dug his shovel into the ground underneath where Stanley's dirt had been.